teachers slash school workers of Reddit. What was the worst conference you ever had with a parent? Copied from an earlier post, so forgive the slight diversion from the question here. I was relating an incident from over a decade ago, when I was a long-term substitute teacher for someone who took maternity leave and then never came back. Most of the kids were good, but a few convinced me to find another career. This particular example happened early. After the 5th time I asked her to stop talking to her friends during class, I threatened to send her down to the office. She told me that if I did that she'd tell everyone I tried to grate her. I told her she probably shouldn't have said that in front of 20 other witnesses and told her to get out of my class and go to the office. She flounced out in a huff. About an hour later I had to stop teaching another class in order to answer an urgent summons from the principal. Apparently Miss Chatterbox had called up her mother, who was now in the principal's office, and bitching about how she had to miss work because yet another evil teacher was hassling her daughter. She proceeded to ream me out for 10 minutes, complaining that I not only hated her daughter and had it in for her, but have hated her for months, had repeatedly made up stuff to get her daughter in trouble, and according to her daughter had been ogling her like a creep all year. She demanded that the principal fire me and apologized to her daughter. I looked at the principal and said, "Do you want to tell her or shall I?" The principal sighed and explained that I was a substitute teacher who had started yesterday and had only met the daughter this morning. This didn't slow mom down for a second. She doubled down and demanded I be fired immediately nonetheless. The saddest part is that the principal had obviously been through this all before many times. I have told this story in a similar thread, but it works for this one as well. My wife is an elementary school teacher and suspected that one of her students may be autistic. The kid wouldn't communicate well at all, had issues with using the bathroom, and showed other classic signs of autism. My wife had a conference with the mother and explained that she would like him to be evaluated, but the mother refused and said that if her son did have autism, my wife was the one who caused it. My wife has learned to handle those situations much differently now. Being accused of causing autism will do that. When I was student teaching, I sat in on conferences with my cooperating teacher. One girl showed up to the conferences, dressed up nicer than I've ever seen her at school, sat up straight, and was smiling from ear to ear. It was really awkward when the main teacher told her parents she was reading below grade level, failing math, and had not passed a spelling test this quarter. Had the confidence and presence of a valedictorian, though. Mine is a little different. No angry parents, just knew I was teaching grade 7 during my internship and was speaking to the parent of a high needs student. Without going into too much detail, the girl we were speaking of had little to no long-term or working memory and limited ability to communicate needs and wants. Anyways, her mother was complaining to us about the bus driver and told us Anne had scabies last month, and I don't think he even bothered cleaning her seat on the bus. My partner teacher and I just stared at each other for a second. The mother hadn't informed the school about the kid having scabies. We hadn't cleaned her desk, the couches, or anything else. And I let this kid hug me every day. I took like 6 showers that night. Had a conference with a parent about their child's performance. Mom kept asking me if I thought there was something wrong with her daughter first grade. I explained that she was capable, but needed to do the homework that was sent home, and could use some extra practice in a few areas. She continued to ask if I thought something was wrong with her. I continued to say no. At the end of the conference she asked one more time, and added, "Because, if you think there is, the doctor is ready to give her meds. You just need to fill out this form." Had a parent-teacher conference end with the parent yelling that she would lift her leg like a dog and piss all over the math teacher. The kid showed up, but the parent didn't, and after a few minutes the girl said she would go home and get her mom no cell phone / house phone. The girl was gone about 20 minutes, came back with mom, who was reeking of meth. So was the girl. A few furtive calls to the police and CPS, and they were both hauled away. We never did get to talk to the mom about the daughter's hygiene issues and academic struggles, but I feel like we solved the problem nonetheless. I had a mother come in on parent / teacher night with her daughter, and this isn't allowed, but a lot of parents do it. The girl is on an IEP, but it never had to offer her any accommodations or modifications. She was a terrific student with a 99 average. I told her mother as such, and said I would also like to see the girl speak up more and not be afraid of her voice. She was always volunteering in class, but when she spoke, she did so in a whisper. She was confident in her knowledge, but not confident in letting people hear her. The mother said, what can she improve? I laughed, but the mom looked very serious, so I just said, honestly, nothing really. She has a 99 average. There's not much to improve on. The mother said, I understand that, but what about everything else? How is her organization? I replied that I didn't know of any problems with organization, seeing as she turned in all her homework on time, and was obviously prepared for every test and quiz. Mom pressed me further to tell her something her daughter was doing poorly at, so I apologized for not having anything to add other than that her daughter was a model student. I gave the poor girl a wink as they left and hoped she'd find the humor in the situation. This doesn't sound like an awful conference experience, but the following week, the girl's performance tanked. She couldn't find her homework. She was suddenly scrambling to study in the moments before the bell rang, and she started second guessing herself whenever she volunteered an answer to a question. It was like hearing her mom's assumptions that something was going poorly completely psyched her out. She would never be good enough. It sucked. Had a student who was confirmed as being sexually abused by her stepfather. He was a convicted sexual offender on parole, who was living with the mother and 2 other children, when he was found to be raping his stepdaughter, and was immediately sent back to prison and charged with rape. The mother came into the yearly conference and immediately started complaining that her daughter's grades had slipped from all A's and B's to all C's, D's, and F's. She said her daughter was lazy and a liar. I wanted to jump across the table and punch her over and over again. The mother claimed to the police and again in court that her daughter made it all up. The daughter only came forward when she discovered that her stepfather had started raping her 9-year-old sister. She had kept quiet until then because he threatened to rape the younger sister if the older daughter aged 13 said anything. He started on her when she was 8. But the mother just kept harping on how her daughter was lazy and uncooperative. I've never wanted to harm another adult as much as I did this woman. I was a first year teacher and I have a very young face. When I go out with my sister 5 years younger, I get carded and she doesn't. When you look like your students, you have to do whatever you can to maintain your position of authority in the class until you get well established in the school. So I try to dress in a very formal way to set myself apart from the students. When I went into my first parent-teacher conference, I was wearing a sweater that had a kind of fastener on the sleeves, and I had accidentally twisted it before I buttoned it. Not all that noticeable, but the mom I was conferencing with saw it. Before I could stop her, there was a rush of mothering, and oh here honey, let me fix that. She had my sleeve unbuttoned and rebuttoned correctly before I could even back up. Her kid was behind her with his head in his hands. He was super embarrassed, and I looked like a little kid whose mom had to help her get dressed. Not my finest hour, but actually a pretty funny one looking back on it. I have one for this. I'm a 7th and 8th grade teacher in Philadelphia. This young man's mom had gotten him identified as gifted when I taught him. He was failing multiple classes, refused to do any work, slept through classes, and took no responsibility. She came into conference, all the teachers are in the same room and parents circulate. Ignored everyone except for 2 of us. Interrupted an ongoing conference the math teacher was having to berate him for being a race traitor and bringing down her son out of ignorance. Came over to me and the English teacher, and when I stood up and extended my hand, she just looked at it. She then looked me in the eye and told me no, you're not even worth it. She turned around and started out of the room, cursing the staff to no one in particular. The Spanish teacher tried to talk to her and got cursed out, so the Spanish teacher called security to have her escorted out of the building. The mom then tried to use evasive maneuvers to avoid security, but was eventually caught and escorted out, told she was no longer welcome on our premises. She tried to sneak into the next conference, but was caught. Follow-up story. This was her middle child. Her oldest had already graduated from the school K-8, and her youngest was in 3rd grade. When the youngest was in 5th grade, they went on a trip to Canada, and she followed, against direct instruction from administration, in her own car, showed up at the place they were having dinner where there wasn't a seat for her, so she sat at her own table, and ordered something for herself. She then tried to stay at the hotel, where the kids were staying, and when there wasn't an extra room, tried to go in where her kid was. When that obviously didn't work out to her expectations, she took her kid and drove back home that night. So, yeah, she sucked. My mom is a teacher and told me about her worst parent-teacher conference. There was a kid who had developed major behavior problems, so she called the parents in for a conference. Only the mother showed up to the conference, which isn't all that uncommon. The mother apparently reeked of alcohol and cigarettes, and came in dressed in ratty old jeans and a top exposing her midriff. My mom sits the mother down and asks her if she was aware that the child hadn't been doing his homework and had been to the principal's office about 4 times in the past month for harassing other students. The mother of the student goes, "Yeah, I'm not too surprised by that. His dad walked out on us a while ago, and they just found him in Florida." My mom, being an understanding lady, says sorry the father did that, and offers a list of resources, attorneys so she can sue for child support, women's shelters, food banks, and so on. The other mother laughed and said, "Oh no, we won't need any of that. They only found his arm. The rest was fed to the gators." My mom sat there in horror as the mother elaborated. Apparently the father owed a few people some money and had no intention of paying them back. So the people found him and fed him to the gators. The only reason they knew the arm was his is because his fingerprints were in the system for several domestic violence charges. She instructed my mother not to tell the student how the father died. As far as he knew, his dad died in an accident, not a homicide. The kid ended up alright in the end. He went on to graduate and get a job. To my mother's knowledge, he never found out the truth about his dad. But I really can't judge him for acting out in grade school. TLDR, a kid started acting up in school, and it turns out it was because his dad walked out on the family and was then fed alive to alligators. I had a meeting with a student who was failing 10th grade English and her dad. He marches into my classroom and says, "I don't like my student's grade. What can you do to make this right, dude? This isn't a restaurant. I'm not going to comp your grade because you threw a fit. If your kid hasn't done her work or come to a single tutoring session, that's not my fault." I worked at a BD school and I have a ton of these, but the worst of which goes as follows. Me plus principal, we know the truth threatening Tonu have very little history on your son, and he seems to be showing signs of PTSD from sexual abuse. Dad not skipping a beat, you don't think he could remember that far back, do you? Motherfriker didn't act shocked or angry, no denial. I worked with 6 offenders for 3 years prior to that, and had never seen anything like it. I drank a lot that night. When the kid and his dad showed up, Dad almost had a freak out because of some desk toy I have, and the son kept slumping forward because he was about to pass out. Poor kid never had a chance. I had to call in a dad of one of my high school girls after she got sassy with me, refused to do any work and was failing. He spent the entire conference with his phone in front of his face. He took a phone call while I was talking to him, and he got my name wrong several times. The girl was a little beach, but suddenly it all made sense. In my second year of teaching theater for a middle school, I had a parent demand a conference with myself and our principal. She expressed that her son could no longer be in my theater class because all that stuff makes you gay, which, for her, would be the absolute worst thing that could happen. It was my first slap in the face, that no matter what work you put in, that in the end of the day the parents will push and pull their kids in life for better or worse. Our principal was outraged by the parents' comments, but held the parents' decision with respect, because really there's nothing we could do. Since this experience, I've planted the idea that the only obstacle that will prevent you from greatness is yourself, not your friends, family, teachers, etc. Ironically, the student joined the class because of the ratio of female to male students that set roughly 10:1. Thus, parents, if you have any concerns with your children about anything, talk to them before making assumptions. Perspective matters.